All right, everybody, welcome once again to the next episode in the Red Delta Project podcast, helping you maximize your potential with minimalist approaches to diet and exercise. Today, I've got a really special treat for you. I've got Philip here on the program from MindfulMover.com. If you haven't come across Mindful Movers, approaches on Instagram and YouTube and stuff, you are seriously missing out, my friend. Like here on the Red Delta Project, takes very much a bit of a less is more approach to maximize your impact while saving time and energy, but at the same time, making your training much more potent and impactful to bring you more benefits. So I invited him on the program here today to share some of his strategies and the ways that he likes to work, because while it's on the same line of Red Delta, it is very new and very refreshing. I know you're going to get a lot out of it. So Philip, thank you so much for coming on. Welcome to the Red Delta Project.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and talk about it.
Excellent. Fantastic. Now, let me ask you, starting off, have you always had this kind of approach to your workouts, or is this something that's evolved over time?
Oh, definitely evolved over time. If you look back at my old post, which I please don't do, but if you were to look back at it hypothetically, you would see that in the past I used to train at one point 6 times a week. And at one point I was even doing 6 times a week and 3 times a day. And then on the 7th day, which is supposed to be a rest day, it always ended up turning into cardio or something like that. So it's definitely tapered down over time to where we are now, which is basically doing once a week and really high intensity accommodating resistance type training.
Mm-hmm. So tell me how this evolution started to come about. Did you start to hit challenges and frustrations in your more time-based approach, or was this just simply you started to learn to do things better and just efficiency was a byproduct of it?
I think actually a little bit of both. So when I was doing the more frequent approach, I was making gains for a while, but then eventually it just kind of hit that plateau stage. And I also hit the pain strain stage where there was a lot of overuse injuries happening there. And around that time, I got in contact with a friend. His name is Eric, and I tell people he's basically my big brother. We debate back and forth, and basically he always wins. That's how that goes. And Eric really taught me the value of testing things out and seeing even if I have something the way I think something works, putting it to the test whenever possible and seeing if that's actually the way it works or if a smaller approach could work. And since then, I started trying to train less. It came down lower and lower, eventually to 3 times a week and to 1 time a week. And I was like, oh, hey, it still works. It still makes gains. And from there it went.
Fantastic. I love how you touched on that idea of testing, because I don't find nearly enough people actually talking about this. There's too much of the rhetoric out there saying, here's the program. It's based on science, or science we cherry picked to convince you that it works. Now just go do it and just assume it's going to work. And that goes in line with some people when they ask me, they're like, how do I know if it's working? I'm like, test. Test it. The results should be fairly self-evident. It should be something that you test it, you put yourself in a situation, you're like, oh, wow, that's great. That's much better than before. So when you decide to test, what is your process for testing? And do you have a way to approach that with your various exercises?
Yes. So we test based on 2 things typically. One is, okay, can I find what's the smallest amount I need to get the gains in something? That's one of the easiest tests to run. You can always reduce the amount until you find out what's the smallest amount of work I need to make to sprint faster? What's the smallest amount I need to get stronger at this lift and that lift? It's so easy to test out the minimal effective dose. The other one we tend to test out is finding carryover. So if I work on my if I work on my planche push-up, does my bench press improve? If I go bench press, does my planche push-up improve? And then if you test those out and you find, oh, hey, the planche push-up improves the bench, but not the other way around. Okay, maybe I'll focus on that planche push-up then, and I won't bench press unless, Bill Gates comes over and says, hey, I'll give you $1 million for every pound on your bench. Then maybe I'll do like a specific approach for that. But until that moment, I'll favor the planche push-up.
Yeah, so these carryover effects, you've mentioned this term. I love this term you use a lot, the free gains.
Free gains.
Free gains. I mean, nothing's more powerful than out there, right? It's buy one, get one free kind of thing.
Yeah.
But this idea of free gains is something kind of new. It's a little bit different from what I talk about, how we know that strength training and everything in fitness is very specific, of course. Like if you want X, train X, you want Y, train Y. But you're starting to really teach me a lot about this idea that if you do X, you also get a stronger Y. And it carries over to other things. So you mentioned like the planche push-up to bench press. What are some other things that you found have carried over very well from one exercise to the next?
Oh, so we have we have 5 exercises that we pretty much prioritize, which is the planche push-up, the handstand push-up, the one-arm chin-up, the front lever row, and the squat, the community corner squat. Anything you can load heavy. But basically, we found with that, like those 5 exercises, you can experience transfer into basically many other pushing exercises, like one-arm push-ups, 90-degree push-ups, basically any kind of push-up form you can think of. A lot of different straight arm exercises like press handstands, planche presses, etc. The same thing for pulling, like rope climbs, weighted chin-ups. The same thing for pulling straight arm, like front lever pulls. Some advanced ring strength, like all the various weighted exercises, like the weighted pushing. And for the leg part, a lot of carryover towards just basically everything, squats, deadlifts, Olympic lifts, sprint speed, all that fun stuff. So basically, the whole point of the Big Five was we're trying to figure out how to gain on almost everything we can without doing everything.
I love it because it's so tempting to just keep adding to our programs, more exercises, more sets, more repetitions. And I think I've recognized this myself. That's been a way I used to approach things for a very long period of time. And strangely enough, I've almost come to see it as almost a form of laziness. More work. Yeah. Like nothing is more lazy than just saying you're going to work harder, because you don't need to learn anything. You don't need to test anything. You don't need to really assess and be like, is this really working? Let me figure this out. It's just more. It's the easiest way to go about it. But you're doing it in such a smart, intelligent way that not only is it just more, but it's better and less at the same time, which I think is just absolute genius. And we need much more of this in our approaches to exercise, especially, I don't know about you, but I don't have all day to work out. Like I get this bang for my buck for my workouts. So I can't do 20 different exercises and get some benefit, a little tiny bit from everything. So when we're applying this sort of thing, go through that list one more time.
Absolutely.
Just for our listeners here, because I think that list is incredibly potent.
So it's the planche push-up progressions. And these are progressions, by the way. Like there's regressions and progressions. So planche push-up progressions, handstand push-up progressions, one-arm chin-up progressions, front lever row progressions, and some sort of loadable squat progression. So that squat can be whichever version that you prefer, as long as it's got the range of motion and got the loadability.
Fantastic. I noticed in my experience, like the squat progressions in particular, that was kind of how I started in my bodyweight training journey. The most is trying to focus more on a squatting type movement pattern rather than relying so much on like leg press and leg extensions and stuff like that. And the carryover I felt over to things like my skiing and my mountain biking and stuff was just, whoa, holy, like, wow. Because before, if you had asked me, all this leg press stuff, is it like, that's making you a stronger skier? I'd be like, sure. Yes. It's got to be working, right?
Yeah. Sure. I'm doing it.
But then once that carryover really was there, I was making those free gains. It was like, holy mother of God, wow, that's really so much better than it was before. I came home and I was all excited. I was like, this is amazing. And that's really kind of what we're looking for from our training, isn't it?
Of course.
We shouldn't be in this questioning idea of like, I think it's working. It should be a slap in the face, like,
I
whoa,
know.
that's so much better, right? That's kind
Yes,
of what
yeah.
we're after. And your methods are more about getting that to actually happen.
Oh, thank you. I feel the same way. I love that part, especially what you said that, a lot of people will almost find it to be like kind of lazy to not to test things out and try to look for a shortcut. But yeah, I totally agree with you where I find it lazy to just be like, let me just toss more at the problem. It's like, ooh, I'm going to toss more at that, toss more at that, toss more at that. I think for one reason, it's like that does require no testing. It is very easy to like just kind of toss more. But then at the same time, I think it's also like a bit of mental thing too. Like if you ever feel that thing of like, oh, I might be missing out on something, I might be missing out on this exercise, adding it in doesn't ever challenge you to like test it out. It just like says like, oh, if I feel any kind of FOMO, I add it in. If I feel any FOMO about that exercise, I add it in. And then it's like, okay, you never actually have to grow the ability to be like, hey, wait, let me be disciplined. Let me stick to the plan and then see, oh, hey, that exercise goes up for free anyway. Okay, well, it takes a longer way to get past that kind of FOMO, but then you feel better in the long run anyway.
I love you mentioned that in a previous video, and this is actually one of the first things that I came across from what you were producing is this exercise FOMO, and it like just hit me right in the middle of the head, like, oh my gosh, this guy so understands what's going on out there in a level most people don't understand, because there is so much of that FOMO. Like no matter what you're doing, there's someone else saying, oh, you're not doing this, and oh, if you're not doing that, you're missing out, and you feel like you've got to add everything in. And the free gains approach says that is good, but because you're getting the free gains, you're getting the benefits of both. Don't feel like you're missing out because you are getting the benefits of both rather than the benefits of just one. So you're not missing out. You're getting it all together. How do you, the free gains approach is great, but also if someone feels like they're in that FOMO stage, like they're always getting pulled in a different direction, how do you recommend people start to break out of that allure of exercise FOMO?
Oh, so the funny thing about that is, okay, so the first thing I tell people is that, look, I like with when it comes to like our brains, we kind of may think that we can look at something and say, oh, that doesn't affect me. But like that, those thoughts you pick up when you're reading like an article about the benefits of an exercise, that can kind of grow in your brain and turn into like a big, full-blown idea. So I tell people like, okay, if you don't want to succumb to that FOMO, that fear of missing out, and add that exercise in, then first thing to start doing, just limit your intake of new exercise material, at least for the time until you figure out that you're making free gains on it. So like if I if I have a FOMO about deadlifts, I'm like, oh, I feel like I need to add deadlifts in. Well, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm not going to look up articles about the benefits of deadlifts. That's not going to help. If I read enough of those, I'm going to be back to deadlifting within 5 minutes. Every exercise has benefits. So it's like, don't look up that yet. Instead, reduce your consumption of those kind of articles and just test it out. Take a baseline, do your other approach, test it out and see, oh, hey, I'm getting free gains on my deadlift. And then to make yourself feel even better, replicate it over and over again. And the longer it goes on, the more you're gonna see like, oh, hey, that actually is working. Oh, it's still working. Oh, it's still working. Eventually you're just like, you know what? I don't have any FOMO whatsoever. So for me personally, that took about, I think, a year of like constantly seeing it before I was just like, you know what? I don't know why I was scared of like working out once a week in the first place. Like it's okay. And the same with all the other exercise FOMOs that I had. As long as you keep fighting it and you keep like limiting your consumption of those kind of articles and you keep testing it and replicating it over and over again, I think you're going to feel better.
I like how your approach is also, I mean, there's so much of what you say makes so much sense, but it's kind of not backwards, but it's different from what you're exposed to so much. Because that idea too about limit your exposure to the information, kind of be on like an information diet, as it were, and just focus on what you're doing and improving. Because again, you go on Instagram, you're scrolling through and our fitness media and everything, and so much is like pound the pavement, do more, get more, like get more. You got to learn, knowledge is power, consume all these books, do all of this kind of thing. And to a degree, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Like, is consuming information sometimes detrimental to our process?
I totally agree. I totally think so. So like when I came up, I did like 25 seminars with, or something like that, with like Charles Poliquin. And basically I learned a lot of useful things, like a lot of tools that were usable, right? But I also learned a lot of what like I'd call blind beliefs, like rules, like things that I thought were absolutely true. So like one of the things I was told was that if somebody went from training 3 times a week to 4 times a week, they would make 50% more gains. And for some reason, I didn't like think to even question that. So I just became an idea in my head. And then now it's just like, why did I think that? Too late. When I did think that, I had everyone training 4 times a week. I was like, you got to train 4 times a week. If you don't, then you're just tossing out gains. There's no point in like doing less than 4. If you do 3, you're losing half the gains. So like, I think a lot of times, yeah, that information, especially the more rule oriented it becomes, I think that can be the actual information that not only kind of can make your training less good, but it also take you like backwards where you're training almost worse. It's not just like you're not growing, you're actually going backward. So I tell people like, testing is a really good way to learn, because you can learn like what amount you need and you can learn what has carryover, and it's very, very simple, and it just works back and forth. But learning like, sometimes like from some of these like model type things, you can end up learning some very anti-knowledge that can end up limiting you and holding you back for a long time.
Mm-hmm. So I think it comes really down to, again, finding the stuff that has the most carryover, the most applicable impact for what you're consuming. Because you can read a book that thick on exercise and it takes you like 6 weeks and you got your head full of all these questions and stuff, but it doesn't impact your training or your habits one bit.
No.
So you could make the argument that it actually was detrimental.
Yes.
Versus reading something like this, like watching one of your videos, and it's like, exercise FOMO. Do I assess that? And I just watched one video of yours, and suddenly I've got this whole new perspective that bringing me a lot of benefit and value. Like, that's what we really need to be focusing on, is what's the stuff that's going to bring me the most value, not just how much can I work and how much can I consume, and just assume it's going to work out in the end.
I love that. I think that's exactly like the kind of knowledge you want to be picking up. Like, what can you, because the answer of like what carries over is almost in a way saying like it's like a form of asking, what do I not need to do? Like, what do I need to do is kind of a hard question. There's so many things that we can possibly do. So, and the most, channels on Instagram and YouTube and everything are like, telling you 5 or 10 exercises that you need to include into your program, or you're missing out. But it's like, you don't really see many who tell you, hey, you don't need to do these because you're going to gain on these for free. Don't waste your time. You're going to already gain them. I think that kind of information where it's like disconfirmation based, where you're trying to find out which rules are untrue, that kind of knowledge is the knowledge you can typically rely on a lot easier. It's a lot easier to see, like, if I make a rule that says all swans are white, it's going to be hard to find every single swan in the world and see if it's white or not. But if I say not all swans are white, that's a good rule, because like if I find one swan that's any other color besides white, I know. Oh, yeah, it's true. It's really easy. So we do the same thing with carryover. It's like, do I need to work with my bench press? Well, let me test it out. Oh, I don't. It goes up for free. Great. That's a much easier rule.
I love it. Yeah, one of the biggest turning points that is right along with this that I made in my fitness career was I stopped caring too much about what supposedly worked and just focused more on, well, what's necessary.
Yes.
Because once you know what's necessary, then you have more of a straight line towards what you actually have to do, but you also have a lot more freedom to pick and choose things as you wish,
Yeah.
circumstances and your preferences. And this seems exactly what you're kind of talking about. It's like, what do I not need? Like, if you don't need it, then why? Why?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's like, and if you keep removing what you don't need, eventually you're going to find out you're going to be left with, oh, well, these things right here, that's what I do need. Because, like, those are the things I can't gain on for free. I can't, like, improve this without doing it. So then maybe I'll work on that thing specifically. And that thing carries over to everything else. Oh, great. Well, then I know what to work on. That's basically how we came up with the big five. Just took a couple of years of, like, testing those things out.
I love it. It's so right to the point, so focused. I have a very similar list myself, but it's a little bit different and stuff. But I'm really itching to try your big five and really give it a shot, because some of those techniques, like I've never been much for straight arm techniques. I've never made it a big part of my practice. Although I will tell you, there was, when I first got into calisthenics training, like over 10 years ago, I started practicing front levers. Mm-hmm. Just basically, I wasn't rowing or anything. I was just doing the front lever. And at the time I had a job where I was delivering exercise equipment into homes. And that was hard, because you're always picking up these really awkward, heavy objects and carrying them like around stairs and stuff. And that was the one exercise that made the biggest carryover to being able to pick up heavy stuff. It's like, I've been doing deadlifts for the past like 5 years.
Yeah.
Lever for 1 week, and suddenly this treadmill got a heck of a lot less. Hey, I've been missing out time on this, and that carried over to swings and cleans and deadlifts and everything else. So I'm sad to say that I kind of got away from that. You're inspiring me to bring that back into my practice for sure, because it's such a potent one. So I appreciate the encouragement and the reminder of that for sure. But getting back to a little bit more on this idea of like more can be actually detrimental. Have you ever heard of the term hormesis?
Yeah. So like you take a little bit of the poison and you adapt to the poison, yeah?
Sort of, yeah. The basic idea with hormesis, that the definition I came across, was that a large dose of something has the opposite effect of a small dose of that same thing, for better or for worse. And I think it's one of the most important lessons that I've learned this year for sure, is that it helps us combat that more is always better approach.
Yeah.
With learning, with consumption, with exercise and stuff, is that there is a point where you actually go backwards. If you keep adding it, it's not like more is always better. At some point, you actually start hurting your gains.
Yes.
And so you want to find the point where it's not more is better, but just better is better.
Yes.
And so with our message out there saying more is always better, chances are we need to kind of back off. Now, I'm finding that myself, but I can tell you for sure there was a time in my life where if you suggested that I back off a little bit, I would fight you tooth and nail.
Yeah, same here.
No way I am taking my foot off the gas. I would rather, the saying out there, I'd rather overtrain than undergain.
Yes.
But unfortunately, overtrain, you will undergain kind of thing. So if I came to you and I was like, I'm fighting you tooth and nail on doing even a little bit less, how would you recommend I start to kind of back off a little bit and not feel like I'm losing just because I'm not driving myself into the ground every minute of every day?
I love what you said about hormesis, because I think that exactly would help. When I learned of that concept, I learned it from my friend Eric and from Nassim Taleb, who Eric taught me to read. And it's called nonlinearity. So the idea is that, like, the gains that you make from one set to two sets aren't the same amount. So like if I pop a NyQuil and it's listed to give me 4 hours of sleep relief, then popping 2 NyQuils might not give me 8 hours of sleep. It might give me actually 12, or it might give me less because of some sort of like weird feedback mechanism. If I pop 3 or 10, then it might just kill me. Like, the effect is not going to be a linear effect. I think that a lot of people, if they have a difficulty training less, I think it oftentimes comes with this idea that more work automatically equals more gains. And at that point, I tell those people, okay, let's kind of explore like maybe the idea that things are not so linear, that one set doesn't give you 5 gains, and then 2 sets gives you 10 gains. Like at a certain point, maybe it's 1 gives you 5, 2 may give you 10, but 3 might actually start to give you 12.3. And then 4 might take you back to 9 because now you're overtraining. 5 might actually give you like, maybe only 6. And then, you get injured and now you definitely get 0. So I tell people, number one thing is that you can't get aboard the gain train if you get aboard the pain train. Those trains are going in opposite directions. So we definitely know that is suboptimal. We also don't know what is optimal. I don't know if that 1 set is the best or 2 sets is the best or 3 sets is the best and where that highest point is. And since we don't know that and we don't want to overtrain and end up in pain, it's probably safer to go with the minimal effective dose and work around that area where we're staying away from taking that trip with the pain train and go from there. And that way, if we just keep making gains like that, we'll probably reach our goal. And will it be optimal? Maybe, maybe not, but we'll definitely stay away from that suboptimal, which is getting a chronic injury, taking trip with the pain train, and then not being able to train at all, and then we'll be really depressed, and then we'll really have FOMO, you know what I mean?
I totally relate to that because now, I don't know, are you an athlete? Do you play sports competitively, or do you have a history of playing competitive sports?
Yes, I back in the day, I wrestled in high school. I played football. I wrestled in high school, and then I did Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for a while. I did some tournaments there.
Yeah, so I think back, like I wasn't too much of a competitive athlete, although I was a bike racer back in college. And I think a lot of these messages of push to the limit and go with 110% come from an athletic or a competitive athletic background.
Yes.
And I think everybody at some point in their life should be a competitive athlete to some degree, where they're really pushing their body hard, because then they can understand what that's like. But also that when you're talking about, I want to be strong and healthy and fit and have a good quality of life, that's not training like an athlete.
Yes.
As an athlete, I had to do everything I could to get 3 seconds faster on a course.
Yeah.
Put myself at risk of crashing, exhausting myself, getting every little bit of performance out of my body. So I had to push as far to that edge as I could. Now that's a competitive athlete, but when you're talking health and fitness, you don't want to go to that. You want to kind of be away from that edge.
Yes.
Scale back and I don't want to get near that edge, like at the edge of a cliff. Like, no. This is still pretty good. I'm still, I can go a little further, but I don't want to go to that edge, because what's the benefit? As a competitive athlete, you could win. Okay, great. In that case, you could say it was worth it. Yeah. But for someone who's just in health and fitness, like I gained 2 more pounds of muscle, la-di-da. Like, exactly. A trophy for that one kind of thing. But at the same time, now my shoulder hurts, and now I've got this thing going on. So it really is a very different approach from being an athlete and having that athletic mindset.
I love that you said that. I think everyone should. Like, because we say, in jiu-jitsu, I used to do jiu-jitsu, and people would say, there's always that one guy who needs to feel the choke. Like, you can't just, show that this technique works. There's always that one guy who's like, I don't think that works. And you're like, all right, come in the front of the class. Let me choke this guy out so he understands the choke works. And he's like, oh, hey, it does work. I think the same thing happens with a lot of people with the whole professional athletes, where it's like, yeah, I think professional athletes are healthy. And I'm like, okay, that guy who's looking to get half a kilo more so that he can win the world championships in weightlifting and put food on the table for his family and not get tossed out to the field. Yeah, that guy right there, he's not thinking about his health. He's thinking about making enough money to support his family. And I tell people, don't be an average Joe training like a pro. Those are 2 different things. You don't need to confuse yourself for that. And a lot of us probably wouldn't want to. I wish there was a machine that I could put on somebody and be like, okay, here's what you're going to feel like if you go the professional athlete route. Press the button and they're like, oh, that feels terrible. And it's like, okay, great. Now we feel the choke. now we understand how that feels. Let's go the other route where we get some gains, but we also maintain our health, feel good the rest of our lives, and we remember that we're not getting paid to break our bodies down like these guys are.
Yeah. Leave a little bit on the table. But I don't want this speech too, because what I found too is leaving a little on the table, like in so many ways, I'm far beyond where I used to be.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up with constant pain all over my body, constant anxiety about getting my workout in when on vacation, constant stress, like for me to have a good day was rare.
Yes.
Back just a little bit, I'm like, what's a bad day like again? You know, like, what a bad workout is. Like everything is on the money 9 times out of 10. And my worst now is better than my best back then. Because I try to scale back. I'm not worrying too much about it. And I've learned to respect those ideas. So I think a lot of people, when they hear these messages of like, you know, scale back just a bit, leave a rep leave a little bit in the tank kind of thing. They think they're holding themselves back.
Yeah.
But in many ways, it's completely the opposite. There's so much more benefit and potential that you don't know you have yet, but you're not able to access it yet because you're constantly throttling yourself to the very limit. And that's what's so liberating about your perspectives and your approaches. I love it.
I love that. That is amazing. And I love that you brought that up. You brought up like the whole idea. I think sometimes people hear minimalist training, and for some reason when it goes into one ear, in the brain they hear minimalist gaining, and then that comes out that side. And it's like, no. I said minimalist training, not minimalist gaining. Those are two different things. So like I tell people sometimes, okay, let's say you're training 3 times a week because there's a study that says that's optimal. Okay, well, here's the problem there. Let me have you train really, really hard 1 time a week. Maybe we're just doing squats and you're squatting like, 300 pounds. And you're like, okay, great. Now we're going to do that again after 1 rest day. So we did it on Monday. Now on Wednesday, we're going to try to hit 305. And it's like, my body doesn't feel ready to do that. It still hurts. I'm like, no. 3 times a week is optimal. We have to hit it on Wednesday. And it's just like, no, maybe you would actually make better improvements if you worked hard and then you recovered real hard and then worked hard again, as opposed to being like, work hard, recover, try to work hard before you're ready to do it again. One of my jokes I always tell people when they have problems with that, I was like, if Usain Bolt hits a world record today, do you think he's going to take a rest day and then go hit another world record the next day? It's like, he's probably going to take some rest days off. And if Usain Bolt needs rest days, then at his level, we might need some rest days too at our level as normal humans, mere mortals, you know what I mean?
I love it. It puts the whole thing into perspective. And it's funny how our minds, we just fall into these traps, into these whole, well, this is the way I need to do it. And this is the way I should be doing it and stuff. And we need to give ourselves the freedom and the flexibility to say, maybe not, maybe that's not. And I think this goes back to that idea of focusing on what's necessary and identifying that are unnecessary. Because if we can, like, we get sucked into these debates and stuff of like, this is optimal and this works and that doesn't work. I'm like, time out. All right, just do it this way. Is this 100% necessary? And 9 times out of 10, the answer will be like, of course not. Like, then why? It's not working for you. If it's stressing you out, mind, body, and lifestyle, and it's not necessary, you've got to have some real good reason other than that. Like, let me hear it, because you're doing it and there's not really that much benefit. And that, I think, opens the door to, let's change this a little bit. Let's change this up and go with a bit of a smarter approach.
I think that's freaking great. Just like you said, people should like try out being an athlete. I think people should also do the other side too, where they try out, like, let me just, you know what, for a month, let's say that you only get 15 minutes to train, 15 minutes. That's all you get. It's like, what goes into your program there? And when you see what goes into that 15 minutes, then it's like, that's probably what you should focus on. And then the extra 45 minutes that you had before, that might actually be like the stuff that you were just kind of tossing in because you had the time. But that first 15 where you're just like, oh, that's all I get? Oh, I guess I'm really going to make sure I add this. Those are probably the important ones then.
One of my kind of almost a pet peeve for me, because as a personal trainer, I don't do this so much anymore, but I worked at a gym and everything was like hour-long training sessions. And this was at a time when my methods were becoming a little bit more in line with efficiency and stuff. And so I would finish people's programs and workouts and it'd be 45 minutes.
Yes.
And, they'd be like, okay, we're good. Let's, you could stretch out, do a little cardio, but you're good. You're done. My boss would get so pissed off at me. Like, you got to give them a full hour. I'm like, you just want me to bloat out their session? Give them stuff to do? I mean, I can do that, but why? Like, just giving them busy work, done. Like, we're finished. We had an objective. We accomplished it. They got some gains. They PR'd. Congrats.
Yep. Congrats.
Why keep going? Like, you've kind of thing. And that's one of those things. It's like, sometimes I felt like I had to bloat out the session.
Yeah.
When you go into your workouts with an objective, you're like, this is my mission, my job. I'm going to get it done. You don't have to fill a certain amount of time.
Oh, yeah.
That's something I used to fall into. Like, my workout's got to spend this amount of time, and it just bloats it out, and you end up doing busy work that doesn't really do anything, but it can compromise your recovery process because you're just spending more energy.
I totally agree. It's like, well, maybe instead it's like, okay, if that time, if you're doing 45 minutes and that works, maybe that extra 15 minutes might even be more beneficial to just spend recovering. It's just like, great. Or sometimes like that extra 15 minutes, not filling it in with another giant load of work might be like, a quicker recovery, a quicker turnaround. And that might be even better gains. I had the same experience with that. But I was working at a martial arts gym. So I had people come in for strength training there. And I had like both sides. I had sometimes people would be like, oh, that's it? I feel like we should be doing more. And I'm like, no, wait till you wake up tomorrow. You're not going to feel that way. And then, and those were fun because they would come back next day and they'd be like, yeah, you're so right. You were so right. I don't need to do more. But then I had the other side people who I also really enjoyed who were like, that's it? And I'm like, yeah. And I'm like bracing for like having to explain what's going to happen, where they're going to wake up tomorrow and be all sore and it'll totally work. And they're going to like, great. I didn't know it was going to be that fast. Oh, I'm going to go eat some food. See you later. It's like, oh, yes, that is refreshing. It's like, that's so refreshing. I had one woman who was like that. She was one of my favorite people to work with because she was like, that's it? And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, see ya. She would just leave and be so happy.
Because at the end of the day, like, we love to exercise. We enjoy it. It's pleasurable. It's good for us. We enjoy doing it naturally. But at the same time, like, there's a lot more life than exercise. We need to do in our day. So as much as I love doing it, I've got other things I got to do. So it's not like I want to just fill my day doing this sort of thing. Yeah. And I think it's a big misconception too. I get this all the time. People are like, Matt, you work at a gym. You must work out all day. You must have all this time. I'm like, no, I don't have all day. Why not? Well, because I'm working. I'm working at a gym. I don't have all day to work out. I'm working. It doesn't matter if I'm 10 feet from the squat rack. I'm working just as you would be in an office. So, for even guys like me, it's like, I don't have all day. Like, I got to get in, get it done, and move on, as much as I love doing it.
So true.
It's funny how I've come to this not looking for an efficiency route though. Like, my workouts are getting so much shorter and I'm spending less time doing busy work and stuff, but it's not because I'm trying to do less. It's because I keep trying to figure out how to make my programs more effective.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And they're just getting less as a result. They're just simply, oh, well, that's how I do it to be more effective. And it just happens to be less.
Yes.
So to me, it's more convincing of less is more, just because going for more instead of just more stuff, but more effectiveness is a completely different mindset that we all should adopt more.
Mm-hmm. I think that ends up leading to the same place. Once again, there was a post from Nassim posted, and it was talking about how, like, only in the past only in recent times do we brag about how ineffective we are. Like we brag about taking like 10 hours to train this week. We brag about like how much work we're putting into something. And it's like, that's not a bragging right. Imagine going to like a restaurant and they're like, yeah, we're going to get your food done in like 10 hours. You're like, you guys might want to fix your stove or something, dude. Like, what's up with that? And that's going to a trainer who's like, it's going to take like, no, 18 hours of work a week to get to where you want to get to. And it's like, okay, do you have any competitors who like will get me there faster? But it's like, I don't know why. Nowadays, it's okay to brag about that. Before, that probably would have been something where someone's like, oh, no. Maybe it's social media or something like that. I have no idea, but it's so weird how now we can brag about how much time we spend compared to before, where now it's like, yeah, people would want to see you because they're like, yeah, I want to see you because you're telling me that I can get there without taking all day to do it.
Yeah, this is just a spending thing. Like I always say, like the analogy, like if you went and bought a car and you're like, oh wow, and people would be bright as if people would say, yeah, the sticker price was $23,000, but I got to get the guy to charge me $30,000. Like, dude, what the hell's wrong with you? That's not good. But we're bragging about expending and spending more as if it's a tough thing. I think it's partially a cultural deal.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm very much just theorizing here, but here in the United States, like we were settled by a lot of very puritanical religious ideas. And I think a lot of that's in our culture still.
Yeah.
Of they who work the hardest and the most are getting closer to the Holy Land, whether it's abs or God or dollars, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny because you go to other cultures, like I've got a number of friends in Europe, and they're like, you Americans are idiots. Like, you work so damn hard. Like, are you working this much?
Yeah.
Like, I would go over there, like, yeah, I've got like a holiday. And they're like, oh, so you took a few weeks off. I'm like, no, I've got 4 days. Like, why? Like, what's wrong with you? Like, well, my company only gives me 2 weeks off. And they're like, that's a crappy company. What's wrong with you? Don't they want their employees to be happy? But I think it's so cultural, and reversing that it takes some time. It takes some readjustment of our perception and how we feel about things.
Oh, I totally agree. Like, I think it's really, it definitely is built into our culture. And I think it's also like, when you go someplace else, you find that that's not like the normal thing. So like my wife, she's Bolivian. And she was like, oh, you want to see something funny? Check this out. And she shows me like this guy. He moved to Bolivia from America. And he's like, so if you hire somebody in Bolivia to come to your house to, like, do something like, like repair the roof or something like that, and you tell them that, they tell you they'll be there at 12 o'clock and they show up at 5 o'clock that night, take that person's number and write it down, because that is the most reliable person you're going to find. Most other people are going to not come, and then when you call them to find out where they are, they're not going to show up that day. They're just going to turn their phone off and not even call you, and they'll show up whenever they feel like it. And it's just like a normal thing. It's like, oh, hey, you showed up at that time. It's like, yeah, I'm here now. You ready to work? It's like, yeah, great. But when you take that like mentality, you bring it over here, it's like, that's crazy. Oh my goodness, I couldn't imagine, everything happening like that. It's always like, no, immediately work. This is how long I work. I'm gonna, even if I'm gassed out by hour number like 3, if I've got 10 more hours to work, then I'm working those 10 hours no matter what. It's just funny how like the cultures have a different thing where if you go someplace else, that whole hard work mentality and working harder, not necessarily more effective, is not a thing. It's just something that we seem to have here very heavily.
Yeah. And it's again, I think it's a laziness thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's laziness or incompetence.
Yeah.
You don't know what you're doing and you don't have an understanding of what's really necessary. It is very easy to just say, I'll work harder.
Yeah.
More. It really is. That's the easiest way to go about it versus if you start to learn how to do it smarter and do it in a more effective way. Yeah. There's a little bit more cost intellectually, and you're going to have to challenge some beliefs and perceptions you have on how you do it. But the long run is that you're actually getting much better, and there's a lot less cost involved. And the thing with less cost is, especially in fitness, it's not just about getting a good result, but it's about keeping the result.
Yes.
The biggest challenge that people have is they can't keep the weight off. They can't keep the muscle. They can't, because they're working themselves to death and they can't maintain that.
No.
If you're working much less, those gains are so much easier to keep for years on end.
Yes. I always tell people that same thing too. It's like the way you get them, if you get them with low amounts of effort, you're going to find, oh, that's great. Maintaining it's probably even less. But if you're getting it with 6 days a week training, it's like, what are you going to drop down to, like 4 days a week? Like, goodness, that's a lot of work to keep. Do you also find that people like if you talk about training less or training smarter, people tend to sometimes hear that and be like, are you looking for shortcuts or excuses or something like that?
Oh yeah. And that's kind of a little bit of rhetoric that I've actually adopted these days, where I kind of like to throw people a little bit for a loop. I'm like, I love the path of least resistance and I love taking shortcuts. When fitness experts, there are no shortcuts worth going. It's like, then you have a detour. That's not a shortcut. Shortcuts, if you look at the progression of anything in human history,
yes,
from literature to manufacturing to everything, everything in society has only progressed because someone found an easier way to do it. They found shortcuts. That's the only way. So when people are like, you can't get there with shortcuts, I'm like, shortcuts are the only way you're going to get what you want. Like, that's the only way we can do this, because you cannot scale hard work. You only have so much time, so much energy, so much effort, so much money. So when you're maxed out, you're not going any further. The only way you can progress is to figure out how to get more from less. That's the only option you've got. So this isn't something we're talking about here, folks, where it's like, oh, this is a novel idea. Oh, when we're talking about what is necessary, this is one of those things that's necessary.
Yeah.
You can't get by without this sort of thing. Listen to Philip here, folks. You know what he's talking about. You need to listen to what he's saying, because this is not his method. This is the method that works, period.
I love it.
The other way is not going to be as effective. It's that simple.
I find it incredibly ironic, especially to hear someone who is a coach say there's no such thing as a shortcut. Because I'm like, well, if there is technically no such thing as a shortcut, then why would anybody actually hire somebody who says there's no such thing as a shortcut? The whole reason that we hire somebody in the first place is for a shortcut. It's because it's saying basically, I could learn all this training stuff myself, but I don't want to actually do that. I want you, who's already researched it, to show me what you learned and get me there without me having to spend all my time and energy doing the experiments. You do the same thing when you go to a restaurant. Like, hey, you person who has learned how to cook me a meal, please, because I don't want to sit there learning how to cook that extravagant meal that you can do that you had to go to school for like 10 years. You know what I mean? It's like anything like that. Every single job out there is usually made to make something smaller. And the only things that are supposed to take longer are typically things that are fun, amusement parks, where it's like, you go over here and you go on the longest ride ever because it's fun. Everything else that has an objective reason, those are all about shortcuts. Just like you said.
Absolutely. Amen. So you had mentioned, hiring you and stuff. You have coaching services and stuff that's available, right? I was looking on everything. Everybody, this stuff that Philip has is just the way to go. I can't speak highly enough of it. I got in touch with Philip here due to our mutual friend, Jake Gay, who you remember from previous episodes, formerly JG Calisthenics, now Jake Gay Fitness and stuff. And you can even see in Jake's approaches and everything how your methods have carried over into his stuff. It's been a joy to watch him grow and develop as a coach and as a fitness practitioner. And you can see where your influence literally came into his approaches. So I can't recommend Philip's approaches highly enough. Where can people find more about your services and your socials and all that sort of thing?
They can go on mindfulmover.com, or they can also find us on Instagram, which is _mindful_mover. And they can also go on YouTube, which is Mindful Mover. It's all Mindful Mover.
Fantastic. Outstanding. I am going to be consuming everything you've got, man.
Thank you so
This
much.
is just, finding you has been such a breath of fresh air in my own approaches and my own training. Everybody cannot recommend this highly enough. Literally, like, pause the podcast now, get on Instagram, start following, get on YouTube. Like, all you got to do, I mean, stop driving if you're driving right now. Be safe, but don't be like, oh, I'll check that guy out like later and stuff like that. Do it now. You will be in better shape and you will have a much better approach by this time next week if you take action today. If you wait till next week, you've lost 7 days of and you're not going to get those 7 days back. See ya. Bye-bye. You've just lost out big time. So, Philip, thank you very much for your time and energy and your inspiration here. Parting last words of advice for those who are listening.
Don't be afraid to test out your blind beliefs. Test with the minimal effective dose and find that carryover, and don't get suckered into FOMO.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much.
All right, everybody. So this has been Philip from MindfulMover.com. You're listening to the Red Delta Project podcast. Questions, thoughts, please, for mercy, whatever you need, reddeltaproject@gmail.com. And I'll talk to you guys next week. Till then, be fit, live free.